David, in light of all that, I'm curious to get your take on this because we have conservatives who have voted on the issue of the Supreme Court, voted on the issue of conservative justices. It's been very reliable. But it's now not just abortion. Now it is IVF that's on the table. We saw that with the Alabama Supreme Court ruling, that state Supreme Court ruling, and now with the Southern Baptist Convention coming out and condemning it and pointing evangelicals in a direction. I wonder, do you see that potentially driving a divide within the Republican Party between evangelicals and their more conservative, harder right views and the rest of the Republican Party who is in favor of a thing like in favor of IVF and fertility treatments and potentially in favor of abortion, just abortion with some limits?
You know, one of the things that I'm seeing is a lot of people are missing the fact that the right is now very divided on judicial philosophy, that the current Supreme Court is really it's still a province of the pre-Trump right. And by that I mean the justices of the Supreme Court right now tend to be classical liberals by and large. They tend not to be authoritarian in their outlook. And so they have actually turned back a number of MAGA legal initiatives over the past several years, from the election steal effort to the independent state legislature theory, to MAGA-related efforts to try to undermine the Voting Rights Act. Even the Mifeprestone decision was turning back a reach goal by more conservative lawyers. So there's actual division on the right in how they view the current justices. And so one of the things you're going to see is that MAGA is actually going to try to look for a different kind of justice from Neil Gorsuch or Amy Coney Barrett. They're going to look for a justice who's much more open to the use of state power. So, for example, if Chevron is overturned, that hurts Project 2025, because Project 2025 depends a lot on the judges having deferential approaches to executive power. But if you overturn Chevron, that removes a lot of the deference to executive power. That would be a setback to Project 2025. It's one of the reasons why these judicial arguments are a lot more complicated than they tend to play out in the media. The right is now very divided over judicial philosophy, and the current Supreme Court is not the apple of MAGA's eye. I can tell you that.
If Donald Trump is reelected again, how much pressure would there be on Justices Alito and Thomas to resign? And who, you're talking about them not liking this Supreme Court, would it be Federalist Society approved lawyers and judges, or would Donald Trump be reaching for others?
I think he would be reaching for others. That the Federalist Society, by and large, is not authoritarian. It is not MAGA. I speak to a lot of Federalist Society gatherings around the country over the last several years, and I would say it's more 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 much more classical liberal, more libertarian in their views, and about 1/3 very, very MAGA. And since the rise of the Trump movement, there is now an independent sort of Trump legal movement right alongside of MAGA. And I think you would start to see them being tapped for judicial nominations in a way that a lot of people would look back at the Federalist Society nominations and say, I wish we could go back to that, because the newer, more MAGA focused, they are totally focused on outcomes. They are totally focused on the use of power to accomplish right-wing aims. They are not focused on individual liberty. They're not focused on limiting the reach and scope of government. It's a very different worldview. And so I think people are missing that the civil war on the right has come to the legal community now as well.
But David, let me get you back on the first question I asked, which do you think there are Republicans out there that look to these decisions made on the courts regarding IVF, regarding abortion and the potential for abortion being banned nationwide, even through maneuvers like we were talking about with Vaughn, and do they say, God, I'm not comfortable with this? Are there people on the margins who say, I'm not comfortable with this, I'm going to vote for President Biden, or do they stick by Trump?
I think it's very complicated. Some will still vote for Trump, but be not comfortable with the legal developments of the MAGA movement. But there are a lot of people in the traditional conservative legal movement who are very much opposed to this MAGA, more authoritarian development. And you're going to see, and I think I would be very surprised if Rahimi comes out. This is the gun control case involving domestic violence restraining orders. I'd be very surprised if the Supreme Court sides with the gun rights groups on the Rahimi. From the oral argument, they were very skeptical of the idea that very skeptical of the idea that you still had a right to own a gun even if you had a domestic violence restraining order. So you're going to see, and by the end of this term, you're going to see some sharp differences between the traditional conservative legal movement and MAGA, and they're going to be very plain and obvious by the end of this term. And it's going to, so when Trump talks about judges, he's going to be talking about a different kind of judge in many ways than the current composition of the court.
Well, we got